Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Live Thrivingly podcast. Today's guest is a friend, brother, and mentor of mine. I was guided to him when I was looking for someone who could help me navigate the integration of an entheogenic experience and the landscape of my own psychological transformation. Otto began his healing journey, as the story goes for many, with a deep mental health crisis. This crisis was revealed to him not as a diagnostic illness, but a call from the soul. This call set him on a path through ashrams in India, indigenous Amazonian plant medicine dietas, and Jungian alchemical work to recover the missing spirit that many of us in modern life are struggling to reconnect with. In this process, he gathered experience, skills, perspective, and insight into the process of individuation, or the reconnection with what drives a life of unique purpose, meaning, and connection with others, a life of soul. He has devoted himself to the work of helping others relocate this spirit and empowers others to consider seeking a reconnection with themselves and validation of their suffering and longing instead of seeking a diagnosis from the Western medical model. He believes that if we can open ourselves to the poetry and aesthetic sensibility of nature, our relationships, and the soul that is orchestrating the dance of these elements, that life can be as simply profound as these fleeting, transcendent spiritual experiences. That healing is not an event, but a process, and is available to all who have eyes to see and ears to listen to the healing calling us from within. It is with great honor to share with you Otto Maier. Thank you for making the space to come on the show today, brother.
Yeah, man. I appreciate you having me, for sure.
So to kick us off, you're stranded on an island. What three essential items would you like to have with you?
Okay, so my question is, do I have unlimited amounts of these items? Like, do I have an infinite supply? That's what
Um,
I'm saying.
no, just a singular item.
Oh, so I can't be like food and water. Okay. Three items. I would say a Leatherman, mm, some type of container to hold water, and man, that's tough, dude. All right, shoes. Bringing shoes.
I love it. I think those are great items. You definitely can't go wrong with a Leatherman, and definitely the container for water is crucial. And having some shoes.
Oh, what are you bringing?
Uh,
You heard the answers. I'm sure you probably got the best answer at this point.
uh, you know, I think my go-tos are some form of rope, or twine of some sort to help with building shelter. Uh, I think I said like a machete or maybe an axe. Probably an axe would be a little bit better if it's an axe with like a pick on the other side, so kind of a two-pronged tool
Yeah.
there.
Mhm.
Um, and then this is kind of a new one, but maybe some hooks for fishing.
Damn, you crushed it. Yeah, I'm gonna switch my last pick to machete for sure.
Yeah.
Something sharp. Yeah.
Well, excuse the background noise here as we move forward. Could you touch on a little more of what you've gathered from your studies in the East and the South and how it has transformed your approach to life in the West?
Yeah. Also, I can't hear any background noise, so I think you're good on that. You can hear it though. So, um, all right. I would say my time, I mean, there's so many things. It's hard to pinpoint one, so maybe I can like touch on a few. I think spending a lot of time in India, I think I was pretty naive to culture shock. And I think at the time I was like, I feel like I'm pretty well read. I'm not going to be shocked with the way that people live in India or the way that their lens. And I totally was. I was like fish out of water, could not believe what I was seeing in that country, and immediately fell in love with it. But I think something that was really interesting about studying in India and actually going to school in India was that like I was noticing the difference between, everyone says like the East is more collective in their thinking and the West is very individual, like they value the individual. And I could understand that conceptually, but when I went to school in India, the teacher would be teaching something and I would have questions or I'd have a problem with what they're saying, or I want to like kind of like start a discussion around like, yeah, I don't know if I fully agree with that. Or maybe the gurus, they would get so upset because they were like, what are you doing? They're like, I'm the teacher, I'm teaching, and this is the lesson. Like you're the student, you listen. And I was like, no, 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 but I have a question. And they were like, no, 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 like you don't understand. We would do this back and forth. And it took me a while to get it. I was like, oh, this is their system. This is how it works. I come from a whole different part of the world where we operate in a totally different way. So I think that was the first time in my life I had been confronted with my own indoctrination, like my own, like, oh, these are the customs that I take as this is just the way it is, when it totally isn't, which was beautiful. It was a beautiful experience, but I would say more philosophically or practically, I think in the East and the South, I would say maybe more so the South. I think something that I learned and I'm still obviously trying to embody and practice is I think that indigenous folks particularly, they have an awareness of, I would call it, you could call it wholeness, totality, or you call it the Tao, you call it just the fact that we are all connected, practically speaking, that there really is no separation, and that's an important value for them. That's like top of the pyramid, is that like, hey, we are all connected, don't forget that. And so what comes with that are ideas like reciprocity, like giving back, not because like it's a virtue, not because you should give back, because like who you're really giving back to, this idea of wholeness, like that we are all connected, it all comes back. So I think that something I learned from the South was just that, and by the South I mean like a lot of indigenous South American folks, is the awareness of our interconnectedness and how important that is, like that being they would call that sacred, and sacred puts that on the top rung of the value system, where in the West I don't think we have a conception of that or a place for it really at all in the modern context.
Yeah, thanks for sharing those lessons and kind of how they relate as well. So, from your perspective as an accredited member of the growing field of psychedelic assisted therapy and entheogenic ceremonies, how do you think we best integrate the evolution of modern psychedelic assisted therapy with indigenous shamanic traditions, especially to mitigate the polarization of the two?
That is a massive question. But I can give, I don't know if I have solutions, but I have some like ideas and some perspectives, some worries. I would say the original answer that I used to have for that question was decriminalize nature. So that movement of making plant medicines decriminalized, so there is more of an expansive space in the States for psychedelic experiences to be offered and experienced in different contexts. So whether that's like a community-based context, that's indigenous folks coming to bring their medicine and their traditions here so we can experience them. So people can use these medicines to pray as well as for therapy. You know, that there's nothing wrong with psychedelic assisted therapy, but for that to be the one and only, because it's the only thing that is legitimate in the eyes of the system, I think is like extremely problematic, especially in terms of the fact that these medicines, the people that keep these medicines, the traditions and practices and cultures that have been practicing with these medicines for a very long time have been around much longer than our very recent exploration that started kind of in the 50s, maybe, you know, with the synthesis of LSD. So I think that it's a bit, not a bit, it's extremely colonialist to then take these medicines and say, well, we know how to use them, and this is the right way of doing it. You know, it's quite arrogant, I would say, on part of our culture to make that kind of statement in the movements that we're making with legislation, right? So my original answer was, all right, so things need to be decriminalized, you know, so there's space for everybody to practice, and then people can choose how they want to sit with these medicines and what context feels like it's most resonant for them. But I recently went to the MAPS conference in Denver. It was like the biggest psychedelic conference that's ever taken place, like 11,000 people, which was a trip in it of itself. But the something I was picking up on from a lot of the indigenous folks who were speaking was some were either vehemently against the decrim movement, and some were just not a fan. And I was very taken back by that. I was like, oh, I thought these folks would be like really about things being decriminalized. But from a lot of folks, especially some indigenous folks in Mexico who are, you know, keepers of peyote and you know, sacred mushrooms, I think their perspective was, you know, y'all kind of come and take things. That's like what you guys do, is like you take things, you appropriate them, and then you don't give back. You know, you take until there's none left. You know, and that's sort of like your ethos. That's your kind of philosophy, is like there isn't a sense of reciprocity. So you will take until it's gone. And we don't want you, like, this is the one thing, you know, like a lot of folks, like the Huiricocha, it's like the biggest sacred peyote land and landmass in Mexico, you know, is being encroached on by industrialization, you know, so people trying to purchase the land. And so just like stuff like that, you know, it's like they're trying to protect what is most sacred to them, and they don't really want to share it, which I don't really blame them. So to make a long answer short, I don't really know, but I do know that there needs to be, I would say what I do know is that there needs to be a real consult and relationship with the cultures that already work with these medicines and guidance from them, and asking, really including them in the conversation, not as like someone who maybe needs to be included and will take, you know, consider their perspective. I think I think they almost need to be leading the
Yeah, thanks for sharing your perspective, Otto. I think that's a really great way of looking at it, and thanks for really highlighting the importance of allowing these medicine holders and keepers and these indigenous lineages that have been working with these plant medicines for so long, like really allowing them the space to help us lead these conversations as we move forward. Um, what is your perspective on the synthetic psychedelics versus the um, more natural based medicines from the earth?
Um, I would say originally when I started working with these medicines, I was very like, it's got to be natural. Like, I don't want to put chemicals or like anything synthetic in my body or like whatever. And I gotta say, through my own personal experience, I've had some of the most healing experiences with MDMA, with LSD, with synthetic compounds, with synthetic 5-MeO Jaguar. These are medicines that I've had tremendous experiences with, and it kind of broke, I would say, my bias there because the idea of it, I like the idea a lot more. I like the idea of natural medicines a lot better than using synthetics. And in my experience, I think I think if the context is, well, I think a few things. I think number one, every medicine affects every person uniquely. So sometimes I think people are like, oh, like ayahuasca affects me this way, so it must be like that for everybody, or it must be good in this way for everyone. And I do not endorse that at all. I think person A and person B in a control group can take the same amount of mushrooms, same set and setting, same, prep, all this stuff, and they will have totally opposite experiences. So I am a fan of empowering people to explore and find what works the best for them in their system. And maybe that's only natural medicines. Maybe that's only one medicine. Maybe that's no medicines, at all. This idea that psychedelics are benevolently healing and good for everyone, I also think is problematic in a lot of ways. But I would say there's definitely medicines I'm not a fan of. I'm not, I think I made this pretty public. Like ketamine to me, I've got some pretty big bones to pick with. I don't think I wouldn't consider it a classic psychedelic. And I think it's just kind of slipping through the cracks right now and popular because it's accessible and it's legal. But I think long term we'll find that it's not actually helping people as much as the media would like to portray it as. But yeah, so I would say I'm a fan of synthetic medicines and natural medicines. I think they all have their place, and I think it's all about the relationship that you have or we have to those compounds, how we're using them, set and setting, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, awesome. Great perspective there. And thank you again for pointing out the importance of the individual's relationship to these substances, whether it be synthetic or natural or neither of them, and that this is a place for them to really find what resonates with them, what works for their system. Like I've heard you say before, these are such circumstantial experiences for everybody, and to put it in a box and think it's one way and everyone will experience these things similar to you is just a uh I don't think the safest way to navigate this space and to share these medicines and experiences with others. uh yeah, and I think that part of the synthetics too is nice, going back to what you said about kind of the scarcity of the plant medicines out there. Um, it offers another it offers an alternative to using the earth's resources when they seem to be dwindling, even though there is measures going in to protect them, and I hope those continue and that we can strengthen those initiatives. But they do offer a place for people to have these spiritual experiences with psychoactive medicines, but without having to use those natural substances that are not the most renewable resource.
Yeah, 100%. I think that, yeah, it's a really great point. It reminds me of like the one retreat center that I work for, Tindaba. They have a education platform. The whole thing is based around 5-MeO DMT, which the natural version of that would be bufo, and then the synthetic is just the pure molecule. And there's this huge, kind of war in the community about like natural, synthetic, the spirit of the medicine is gone, it's synthetic. And like maybe there's some validity to that. I would say my personal experience, I've had better experiences with 5-MeO than I have with bufo. And I think that's because the philosophy with that specific medicine, there's a lot of benefits to using synthetic because it's so strong. With the synthetic, you can get a milligram specific dose. And with a medicine like 5, every milligram of that molecule makes a huge difference in how much medicine, how strong the experience is. So with something like bufo, you can't really, I mean, you can measure the flakes, but you have no idea how many milligrams of that molecule is actually in the bufo. So what I see is you see an influx of people having experiences where they're overdosed or given a big dose. I don't want to say they're clinically overdosed, but they're given a big dose of bufo when they could have had a specific dose of something synthetic. So there is a bit of like safety in using a synthetic, so it's a good example of like, it's yeah, I don't think it's black and white.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. Along the same line of conversation, with the psychedelic and entheogenic medicines, I know you're a huge proponent for integration work, as we work on that together, and you work with many other individuals as a psychedelic integration coach. Would you like to kind of provide a little bit more perspective into what integration is and the importance of it?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, it's huge, again, like a huge topic. Yeah, this is the main focus, and I would say personal obsession that I would call my work is integration. And I think essentially what integration is I think a lot of times in our culture, we see integration as like, we look at it through the lens of, I would say, effectiveness or like productivity. And in those terms, usually the conversation is like, you get a lot of insights from your medicine experiences. And integration is about the utilization of those insights. I think it's much deeper than that. I think that integration is essentially this idea that, like, again, it brings it back to this indigenous idea of wholeness and wholeness of process. So I think that integration is this idea that we are in a process of, you would call it individuation, you could call it becoming who we are, we call it healing. And I think that process, starts a long time before the medicine. The medicine reveals a lot, and you have this big experience, and then the integration afterwards is really I would say, an embodied connection to that process. It's like a conscious movement with that process. So if you think it starts in ceremony and then afterwards you're just integrating the experiences, I think you're missing the greater context. There's this much larger context. And it starts with like, what's bringing you to have this experience in the first place, And usually there's a long string of personal history, context of your family lineage, the things that your parents had struggled with, the unlived dreams of your parents that are kind of trying to make their way through so there's this greater process that I think the integration, engaging in integration, makes us conscious of the fact that there's a larger movement, I would call it, of the soul, of our authentic self that's trying to make its way through, that's been trying to be heard, typically through symptoms that they call like depression or anxiety. These are like little bits of our wholeness, or little bits of the process of expanding into who we actually are, trying to make their way through. And I think that the medicine really amplifies that process and brings up a lot of material that we can use to workshop to really amplify that process. So I would say a lot of the work that I do is helping people see the process that they're in. I try to help them use the images, the experiences from ceremony, as well as their dreams and their symptoms, as a compass, so they can get in touch with the unconscious parts of their soul that are trying to make their way into their life. And the ultimate like goal of that, I think, is to be able to live a life that isn't in alignment with our nature. Everyone's nature is individual and unique, so everyone's compass is unique. So I don't think there's one integration needs to look like this or that. But I do think that the process, what it really is becoming more aligned with and attuned to our internal compass, and being able to live a life that, yeah, is in harmony with that in a lot of ways. And sometimes that means the death of a relationship. Sometimes that means the death of a job, the death of a sense of who we are, you know. It can mean a lot of things. It's a really deep process, but I would say that I don't know if there's anything more fulfilling. And I think that it's interesting to be an integration guide, because a lot of times I think people will come to the medicine for one thing. They think like, I'm coming to the medicine because I have anxiety. And then they'll do the medicine, and then what's underneath the anxiety might be something that they really don't want to accept, which is maybe that, like, hey, you got to the top of the mountain maybe in your career, but you went up the wrong hill. You're actually an artist, not a investment banker. Sorry. And it's like, and they're like, why am I anxious? It's like, well, you're anxious because like your soul is calling for something very different, And that, I mean, that's just one example, but I think what's beautiful about being an integration guide is like, sometimes I think people come to the medicine for one thing, they get something totally different. And what's beautiful about that is I think sometimes those experiences of the medicine make it much harder to stop listening to your soul. And that's a perfect place to be in, because you're like, shit, now I have to change, And it's like, I love being the person there who's like, hey, when you're ready, man, like we can do this, we can like, and supporting people and like validating, what that call is.
Yeah, beautifully said. And I can't agree more. And I think in my own process working with you, you've definitely helped me so much illuminate these things and really recognize what's happening within the process. And yeah, like validating my experiences and the feelings. And, that was just a huge thing in itself too, to know that I wasn't alone in the process I was going through. And anyone that's listening that resonates with this, like that we're not alone, and that many of us have experienced these dark nights of the soul and these deep processes of feeling so disconnected from spirit, and then ultimately to begin to kind of reattune that compass and pull the pieces back together to wholeness. And the space you're able to hold in that, and the tools you're able to bring to your clients is absolutely phenomenal. And I can't thank you enough for the work that you've done for me and all of the other individuals out there.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. It's been really fun to to work with you and support you, especially like through the dark night. Like I'm so glad you brought that up because I think that that's like so many people that call me, which I'm like so happy to be the person who gets to hold someone through that process because I always wanted that when I was going through it. Was like, it would have been so nice to have someone be like, hey, you think you're lost, but you're really just, that's part of it, of what you're going through. Is like, you have to be, there's this idea in alchemical psychology that I really like called negredo. So like alchemists essentially would have to use heat. You put all the materials into one container, and everything has to be boiled until it's pitch black. Darkness, total, utter. There's no answer. There's no, I'm feeling better because I have some type of like orientation. It's total blackness. And the function of that is that it makes clean what is pure. So there's some metal that is extracted from that process that isn't tainted by any other substance in the container, right? So like with that translating into being in a process of a dark night, it's that you have to go into this process where anything that is not soul, anything that is not true, it has to be burned in some capacity. It has to be separated out. You have to be able to see, through that process of not seeing allows you to see and recognize what is true. So having someone be able to be there and just even to let you know that like, hey, you're not just like fumbling around in the dark. I mean, you are, but like there is a greater intelligence that's sort of guiding this process. I think it's like that takes such a weight off, and it also like inspires a sense of like trust in what's happening, so you can actually hear kind of the intelligence or see what the darkness is trying to show you. That makes sense.
Yeah, and would you say that when it comes to the process of the dark night of the soul, and I know you could refer to it as many other things, soul loss, existential crisis, existential depression, all these things, these times where we're questioning who are we, what are we here for, the confusion sets in, all those things. But was there a time, or is there cultures out there in the world that recognize this process and can hold people through it better than kind of the modern age, and especially in the Western world where we tend to diagnose this as a disorder and a mental health disorder that needs to be treated with medicines and things like this rather than therapy and soul retrieval?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are a lot of cultures that recognize this and are a bit more tribal, a bit more communal. And so in that is like what I was talking about from the South. So practically speaking, the integration of wholeness is that no one is left behind, right? So if someone is left out, then there's not like, oh, well, send them to a therapist. It's like, no, there's now we're listening, you know? So what was I thinking of? Ubuntu, like, and the Buiti in Africa, they're a tribe that are like based around having communal rituals for people who are going through these processes. And the entire village comes if there's a Buiti initiation. So someone's like really suffering and they need to use the boga into their rituals to help someone have a soul retrieval. The entire village is a part of that movement, right? So imagine like going through something like a dark night and then you have the whole village being like not only not shaming you for going what they're going through, but being like, oh, this is important and we're all here to support you. You know what I mean? Like that's an incredible level of the integration of wholeness, that's like it's huge. So I think that what we tend to do is, yeah, pathologize, there's something wrong with you, and that comes from this fundamental assumption that we are separate from the whole, as opposed to if there's something going on with an individual, number one, first being curious. Number two, I wonder if this is like a symptom of something larger. Like if one part of your body is struggling in some way, it's not isolated from the rest of your body. I mean, we do the same thing with psychology. So I think that I think I kind of lost your original question, but you know what I'm saying? Yeah, I think there are cultures that support this process, and I think it's sad that we don't have the support, especially because I think I just think there's a lack of soul integration in our culture and a lack of integration of wholeness, which I also love our culture. I don't want to totally put it down, but I do think that the lack of soul is really felt. I think that's where we're suffering tremendously because there's no room for soul. And when the soul does come, it's being told that it is depression or that you're anxious, as opposed to like, oh, these are like signals and signs that there is something not balanced here. There's something out of alignment. So instead we like pathologize that, and I think that's tremendously unhealthy for everybody involved, really.
Yeah, wonderfully said. Thank you for illuminating that further. And I I think too that this process of the dark night and soul loss and all these things, like you said, very much supported in some other cultures and things. But through my own process, what really, kept me going on some of the hardest days with just recognizing that it's a very beautiful process and one that can be seen with so much love and grace, because it is, although in the darkest parts of it feels like you are not moving anywhere and that there's no way out, but over time just holding that the light is creeping in more and more and more and illuminating this darkness, and that there is a place that, and not to say that there's an ultimate destination where we're not ever going to have to go through hard things in our life, but to know that this process is a blossoming in some kind of way of the soul and will bring you in more alignment with your purpose and just the overall harmony of the collective on the planet.
Yeah, I love that. And through listening to you, I think the answer that's actually in me just like popped out. But this is way more concise than my last answer. But okay, so you go through this dark night. The idea of that is you are more individuated. You're way more connected to your personal power, your personal God, you could say, your personal spirituality, your personal compass. What is like your power and your vision for your existence here in the context of the whole, independent of the culture you were grown up in, the family system, all this stuff. It is instrumental in your spiritual and emotional growth for you to individuate from your parents and your culture. So you have this dark night process, like our nature is literally designed to do this. So we have this soul process, this initiatory rites of passage. In other cultures, they have these initiatory rites of passage that are containers to hold the dark night. And you can use an example of like the vision quest, the Lakota vision quest. You do all of this preparation for months, sweat lodge, prayer ties, all this kind of stuff. And you go out and do a four days, no food or water. You stay in one place in the woods by yourself, but you have your family praying for you and doing sweat at the bottom of the mountain, and you go up the mountain, right? So you're consciously choosing to go into that process, to go in isolation, to go it alone, to go find yourself, right? And deprive yourself of, food and water. And then when you come back, you're embraced by the village and you're supported through the whole thing. So that's like, what's beautiful about that is there's a container for that psychic energy. There's a ritual that provides the context for this psychic energy, these things that you're feeling. Where in our culture, we like, for some reason, have just gotten rid of it completely. And so these processes, they don't stop. They happen spontaneously on their own, but we don't have context for it. So people are like, what the hell's going on? Do I need to get on antidepressants? Like, what's happening? It's because we've become disconnected from our roots, from ritual. So I think that's the more concise answer for you.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And I love that you point out kind of those ritualistic processes, like the vision quest is a great one. And through my own observations, I noticed that, especially for men, as we transition from boyhood into manhood, one, that there's a lack of what true manhood looks like in our culture, and then two, that we lack the processes, like these ritualistic processes of boyhood to manhood, that really shape our psychology and allow a greater spiritual maturity to come through, so that we can move to a place of the mature masculine, and really bringing our value as a masculine male into the world, and how that helps shape our realities.
I'm so glad you brought this up too, because I think that's brilliant. Because I think that a lot of times, I think the attitude towards ritual in the West is that it's like there's something like frivolous about it, almost like it's not practical, or it's not like gonna actually get you anywhere. There's something woo-woo maybe about it. But from the Jungian lens, there is something that when we enact rituals, it's almost like a technology. And the ritual allows the energy, if you could call it archetypes, or you could call it psychic energy, to have an embodiment. So it has a place to become conscious and embodied. So without that, we may experience it as inner tension, some type of inner turmoil, right? And I think particularly what I notice in terms of like male psychology and men's archetypes in our culture, I think because we have particular cultural attitudes towards what is masculine, and like, what is an ideal man, without the initiatory ritual or rites of passage to actually embody any qualities. My personal belief or notion, or what I've gathered just from reading men's psychology and noticing my clients, is that I think there are, like in the Greek god pantheon, there are like 8 different masculine gods. And our culture really only likes 2 of them, like Apollo and Hercules. You want to be the hero, and you want to be like specialized. You want to be like really skilled, and you want to be heroic and strong, and definitely not weak. So you want the sword and you want the fire, right? So there isn't a lot of room for, or what I find interesting is that, all right, well, there's 6 other gods that are all men, and they are ideals. So like, to me, what I'm noticing is that there are these 2 gods, but there are all these other archetypes that allow for the wholeness of what masculinity could be. And without the ritual and without this openness to that, there are energies that are missing. And I think that creates this sort of disembodied masculine wound, or people are saying that like the masculine is very wounded, and like men aren't like functioning the way they need to. It's like, well, instead of blaming men, it's like, well, where is that energy that would allow them to function in a way that's more whole? And I think it's without the ritual, there's a closed cultural attitude towards what is traditionally masculine, and characters like Dionysus or more magician types, folks that are a little bit more attuned to their feelings or their emotions, or attuned to the occult, or things that are a little bit outside of the realm of like Herculean societal structural standards, are kind of pushed aside. So that energy doesn't allow I think the wholeness of like what we could be as men. It shames that, I think, to some degree. And I think it creates a disassociation internally in us and in our culture. And I would love to be able to, and I think a lot of men are doing this, like work like Sacred Sons. There are a lot of like men's groups and stuff that I think are trying to make conscious these other archetypes, and like what made them become lost, and we desperately need them. I think we desperately need a more expansive idea of what it means, to be a man, and kind of the supportive rituals that'll allow that energy to permeate.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you for pointing out those examples. And uh it's personally work that I love doing, and I love sharing with other men and women as well, because if anything, as we are collectively one, as we say, like, my work is your work, and that goes for the females and the men out there, and how we can ultimately get to a place of much more complementary um integrations with one another's energy as divine masculine and divine feminine. So I'd like to ask, beyond the super expansive experiences, like vision quest and plant medicine and these type of things, what are maybe some simple things that someone could engage in to help them live a life of more soul?
I would say, I love this question. I would say, I think everybody has something. Well, I'll start with this. You ever had the experience of you're either watching something, or you're listening to someone talk, or you're listening to a song or something. You're doing something, and all of a sudden your lens of focus becomes like, you become like, I'm hanging on every word of what you're saying. Like, this is landing for me, or this is like engaging my life force in a way that is like captivating. It can be a conversation, it can be reading a book. There's some narrowing of your focus and engaging your whole being, right? So Jung believed that that is the soul. Grabbing that movement of the focusing of your awareness is the soul grabbing you and being like, hey, do this. Be interested in this. Keep learning about this, whatever that is. I think everybody has that call to some degree. And for some people, it's an obsession with mushrooms. For some people, it's like it's poetry, or whatever it is. For me, like, I mean, there's a handful of stuff like art and Jungian psychology. I get like manic about it. Like, cannot stop reading about it. But I think that if you can find that and just be privy to it, even if you don't, like, when I say that, it doesn't come to mind right away what that thing is. But if you can be curious about finding and being open to what that thing is, and it could be many different things, I think that's the call of the soul. And I think that if you follow it, what's beautiful about it is you're not necessarily going to get an answer about an outcome, but what's going to make of this. Is this going to be something productive, or am I going to be able to make a career out of this, or whatever the hell? You may or may not. But I think what truly is happening is you're engaging in the work of your life. That is your life's work, is to focus and give life to those things and to make more room in your life for those things. And what's beautiful about it is the payoff that you do get, regardless of the outcome, is meaning and fulfillment. So I think that that's a really simple way, is to just find what that is. And I think for the most part, you know what it is. We all know what like really grabs our interest.
Wow. Really, really powerful stuff. And like you said too, it's very simple for us. Maybe perhaps we've not listened to that call within, or acknowledged that time when our focus seems to narrow, or inspiration fills us up when we listen to someone talking about something, or witness someone doing something. Like, instead, recognizing when that arises, and following that. And would you say as well that even if you're in like maybe a career or something, that's okay, and you enjoy the job, and it's bringing you money and stuff, but you know potentially, like, leaving this job is not possible for you, but if you can find something outside of your career that you do after work or before work, etc., that can cultivate this creative part of you, this childlike part of you, this expressive part, that you could find a well of fulfillment from that may make you even happier in your job. And it may not be, hey, I need to quit this job. It might really just fill your life with a lot of um, inspiration, and it really fill your cup up, and you will probably show up different to work. But I think sometimes it's challenging because jobs lock us in one place, or careers, or where we live, or our life situation, and we can't always get out of those things. But what we can do is find something within that brings more meaning to our life.
You nailed it. Yeah. Couldn't agree more with that. Like and it's, yeah, I think what you're saying breaks out of the realm of like black and white thinking in terms of the soul. It's like, oh well, I have to like leave my career and like do my soul's work. Well, sometimes like doing your soul's work as a job becomes exhausting. Like maybe that's actually not supportive to your work. Maybe what's more supportive is you having a job that gives you the freedom and time and not have to worry about making an income to work on your soul's work. I think, and I love this idea that it's really just making room for the soul and not pushing it away. I mean, you don't have to make your whole life about it, obviously. For me, I have, because like that, I think that's part of my thing. But like, I think it's about the fact making room for it, making room for it in your relationships, making room for it in your day-to-day life. And with a culture so hyper fixated on making money, and like, I think our culture really has that scarcity in our, like, it's grabbed everyone by the scarcity. It's like, so everyone's in this a little anxious space of like, well, I gotta keep going, I gotta keep growing, I gotta make it work, or else I'm not gonna have the retirement, or I'm not gonna have the security, or I'm not gonna have enough, right? So there's not a lot of room for the soul when we are very preoccupied with being enough, or having enough, or like being in that survival. Because I was going to say, a lot of what you can do to bring the soul in is to do nothing. Like, intentionally make time in your life to do nothing, dilly dally, look at walk around, like, be bored, because like that's when you make room for some type of inspiration, some type of intimacy with your being will start to emerge when there is more space. But talk about nervous system regulation, our culture, it's like, dude, you gotta go. There's no room for dilly dallying. You gotta like grow up and make money and and anything that's not in the realm of that Herculean productive thing, it's sort of it's not valued. It's like, well, you're wasting time. Like, it's like, no. This is like kind of like the best use of my time, long term. And yeah, I just think there's gotta be more room for it. We need more room for it.
Yeah, I'm a huge proponent for creating more space in our lives to slow down and even in just to rest, and because when we rest is when we can really listen and hear and heed the call and have those creative downloads, that some of the people we label as geniuses in our world, even though I think we're all geniuses, we just have to learn how to listen and connect to that ether of information that is unique to us that can come through. Um, but yeah, making space for that. And I think that I love the self-development field and the topics of it and reading the books and engaging myself in the things, but it seems like there's so much focus on biohacking and optimizing and physically and mentally really leveling up and getting to this next level so we could gain more status or achievement and make more money, versus really focusing also on the growth of the soul. And it seems like so much of the growth of the soul comes from, like you said, doing nothing. And there's beauty in developing physically and testing ourselves mentally and expanding in these capacities, but sometimes the most expansion can happen from rest. And that goes back to kind of what we talked about masculinity and not having as much of that, the more yin energy and the magician and lover archetype. It seems that's when we're more driven from the king and that warrior archetype, to always be doing and expanding instead of resting and loving and engaging in the sacredness of life and that dance.
I love that you brought the end of that. Is like, I think about this a lot, actually, the sacredness of the dance of life, right? Like, so in the one of the fundamental masculine mythologies, the story of Parzival, or the Holy Grail, right? It's like the idea that the entire masculine enterprise must be guided by the proper why. So your why for what you're doing is the most important thing that's driving the whole bus. And it makes me question, in our culture, what is our why? It's status and power to a degree. We worship the pyramid, we worship the hierarchy. We want to be at the top of the pyramid, right? That's our why. There's nothing wrong with striving for power. I don't want to shame that in any degree. In any degree. But what I'm hearing when you're speaking is it's just a lack of integration. It's not that the left hand and the right hand, there's a better or worse path, or rest is better than being active or whatever. I think it's that no matter what we're talking about, it's like, well, what's being left out? What element of this wholeness is out of balance? And it's clearly out of balance in one direction. There isn't a lot of room for the yin. There's not a lot of integration of the yin in the yang, in the yang, where like that yin and yang, that symbol is like totally overlapped. There's more similar than there is difference in those two symbols. So I think that in all of this work, it's like, for one person, maybe they need more yin, and then maybe someone else, like the fear is to actually put themselves out into the world, to like actually go and do that and like be that Herculean warrior archetype and grab the sword, and like you need to go after the thing that you're afraid of. So I think that for everyone it's unique, but culturally speaking, yeah, we are not connected to our why. And I think the true why is one that's integrated with everybody. And for me, I've been thinking about this recently, is that like, I was like, yeah, what is at the top of our value hierarchy in this culture? And I was sitting with the Yawanawa, or like a Brazilian ayahuasca culture, and part of their ethos is the dance, that like the biggest, and not I don't want to say the biggest, but something that they value most is the dance, the celebration of life, you know. And so the celebration isn't in the shadow, it's the main piece, is that like to celebrate life. That's what we're here for. And I adore that. I love that, because um I think that that's a piece in our puzzle of the answers that we have created culturally. I think would do us a lot of justice. I think is to, if the what was at the I guess I wonder what our lives would be like is if the powers that be, culturally speaking, if what was at the top was to celebrate life. Like that was our why we're making buildings, why we're creating civilization, is so we can celebrate life more fully, or honor life more fully. I think that would be beautiful. I think there's a lot of like creativity and beauty that could come out of that shift.
Absolutely. And it's the celebration and the dance of this life, to be lived and to be enjoyed is very similar from the way that the Yawanawa see it, with like kind of that tantric and non-dualistic viewpoint of, that yeah, it's great to grow and develop and expand and all these things, but also, the fact that we're doing this work ultimately to arrive at, a place that's more whole and can be more engaged with the experience of life. And I know you speak to this, and Sergio and many other people I know, that, this has been a great lesson for me to learn, and integrate into my life, definitely along the spiritual path, because it takes out the idea that there's this ladder to climb and this enlightenment point and ascension to reach, and rather that we're all worthy, and we're all capable of just tapping into this bliss of life and this enjoyment of the experience. And it doesn't always have to be in ceremony and this and that. I mean, it could be grabbing a drink with friends, it could be in a conversation with someone at work, like just everything being sacred, and everything being so presently engaged with all that you do.
I'm so glad we're talking about this, because I value this so much. And like it's really, like the consequence of us thinking about life in terms of this ladder, I think it hurts everybody. Like I think everyone gets harmed by this. It's not like, oh, there's these elites at the top that they're benefiting and everyone else is suffering. And like I think it's a no-win situation, where like if you don't have that why that's incorporated in the whole, I think that the real truth of it is less of an opinion, and I do believe it's more of a reality, because of our physiology. Like people at the top are clearly not happy. They're clearly unhappy just like everybody else, so like I don't think that we are designed to be unhappy. I think that's a signal of something. Well, something's missing here. Something's a little bit off. So like even in terms of the hero's journey, so that whole archetypal story, the last bit of the story is that why you did the whole journey, and you go into the underworld, you push yourself into this place where you die or you dissolve or you face the dragon or whatever it is, and you isolate yourself from everybody and what is known, and you come back. And the idea is that when you come back, you share the fruits of your journey with everybody. And I think that that's not a small part of the path. I think that's like it's the point right before the circle, the Ouroboros, like the circle meets the wholeness, is that like you connect, the whole thing connects when you come back and reconnect and share with everybody. So the top of the pyramid is not, I'm the Hercules guy and everyone's worshiping me. and I have all the power. That's our culture's story. It's like, be that guy, be at the top of the mountain in some fashion, metaphorically speaking, where the mythos here is give back to the, like, acknowledge the whole dance, bow to the whole thing, give back, reciprocity, acknowledge the sacred, which is the fact that we are all one movement. Your movement to the top wasn't an isolated thing. There was all these relationships and all these things, all these, Joseph Campbell calls it like 10,000 unseen hands. There's the entire movement of life that helped push you up the ladder, right? So like there has to be that reciprocity and acknowledgement. Even going on the hero's journey is a privilege, so to give back, I think that is the proper, like, recycling of energy that allows us to, I think, actually feel fulfilled, actually feel happy, actually feel that we're connected. And that's what connects us to I think Joseph Campbell calls it the world navel. So like the navel of the world is what actually gives us the nourishment that we're seeking in when we're looking for power, when we're looking to get to the top of the pyramid. So I think that that's a lot of what integration is. And I mean, you've shared a lot of this. I think that naturally happens when we follow this path. It's not something we have to, again, do, like you're offering yoga. You've gone on this journey, and now you're like offering it back to your community. And I'm sure you can attest to the lived experience of, you go on this path, and when you are offering it back to people, like the sense of fulfillment, not responsibility, that really comes from that.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I think one like little story that just stands out in my mind so much when, as we've spoke so much about the hero's journey and the return and coming back, you know, there's this pull to want to stay oftentimes in these beautiful destinations or these spiritually charged places and with your community of like-minded individuals in the world. But there's this power in going back into the real world, and not being the monk on the mountaintop, being the monk in the boardroom in the traffic jam. As soon as I got back from Peru in May, I was playing a djembe at a local park with a friend, and 7 high school guys rolled up on us and sat down, and we played drums for them, and I played my flute. And one of them started crying and gave me a hug, and 3 of them out of the 9 were really touched by the experience. And I looked at my friend who was with me, and I was just like, this is why I come back. This is why I don't just want to stay in these places where I'm very much like everyone else. I like to bring this medicine to others and share these fruits, like you say, on the return with others. That brings so much fulfillment, and I think that's really what we're here to do.
So glad you shared that. Yeah, because there's like there is a magic that happens when you do that. Like that guy in the park was crying. I mean, I think that yeah, there's something really selfless, but it's not martyrdom. You're not coming back and sacrificing your own gifts or whatever. It's like when you share the whole, it gives back to you in a tremendous way. And I think that's like I think that's the mark of spiritual maturity, I think, is to actually see that, to not just say like, yeah, we're all one. And I had this ceremony where I realized we were all one. It's like, that's beautiful. And also, like, it'd be more beautiful if we lived that way. If we like went and lived as if we are all one unit. And like, how would you actually live if you knew in your bones that that was true? If like you looked everywhere and all you saw was yourself, like, it's a big difference between those two.
Yeah, love that. So to cap off the show, Otto, I like to ask, when you hear the words "live thrivingly," what comes to mind for you?
To be honest, the first thing that comes to mind is your logo, but I know that's not the answer to the question just because I've seen it a few times. Yeah. The words live thrivingly. I think, oh man, I think I would have normally tried to pull some poetic answer out, but honestly, man, I used to not like this pursuit of happiness idea. Like, oh, like being happy, it's like not just about being happy. But when I think of thriving, I think of like, yeah, being joyful and like not like as an effort. I think like life can be effortlessly joyful. So I think when I think of thrivingly, living thrivingly, I think of those moments, like you said at the park, when you have this like transcendent experience, just like bringing your djembe to the park, and then all of a sudden you're making some guy cry. And it's like, whatever that is, that synchronous world navel God moment, like I think that's it. It's like being like connected to that. And I think it just like I think for me, it just makes me joyful, makes me happy.
And it's an effortless flow.
Yeah, I don't think it's like you gotta like really do it. I think you gotta like be it. Yeah.
I love that. So,
Yeah.
anything else you'd like to share?
Um, Maybe just plug my services. If anyone is feeling
Yeah,
lost out there, you know, if this like idea of individuation and integration really connects, or you've had some psychedelic experiences that have left you kind of like a little bit jarred and confused or um, lost in some way, yeah, please check out my stuff. And if I can't help you, I can definitely point you in the direction of someone who can, for sure.
yeah, and I'll share a link to Otto's socials and his website below in the description. Definitely check out his work, and yeah, if you'd like to get in contact with him, definitely do so. He has been such an amazing mentor of mine, and I would highly recommend him to anyone who feels the call.
Thank you, Jackson.
Yeah, thanks for coming on here today, Otto.